Now, according to foreign media reports, the slain Al-Qaeda head Zawahiri was living in a house that belonged to a top aide to the interior minister in Afghanistan government. Sirajuddin Haqqani, the interior minister in Afghanistan government, is also the head of a dreaded terror group, the Haqqani network, and is believed to have close ties with Al-Qaeda. Haqqani also has a $10 million bounty on his head. Reports say that the members of the Haqqani network tried to conceal Al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri and restricted access to the site where he was killed. The US has reacted to the reports, calling the hosting of a terrorist by Afghanistan a violation of the 2020 US Taliban deal to bring peace. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that Taliban grossly violated the Doha Agreement and repeated assurances that would not allow Afghan territory to be used by terrorists. So Ayman al-Zawahiri is dead. He was hiding in the heart of Kabul. What does this mean for global security, and how does it change the dynamic and the relations between US and Afghanistan and India and Afghanistan? Joining us to discuss this, Major General Gen Meston, former Defence Attaché in Afghanistan, Maroof Raza, Group Consulting Editor, Times Network, and Achal Malhotra, former Indian Ambassador. Thank you, gentlemen, for speaking to Mirror Now this afternoon. General Meston, let me come to you first. Let's talk about the strike itself. What would it take in terms of military strategy, human intelligence, surveillance to achieve something like this and no collateral damage?
Rohit, it's an absolutely well-planned, well-conceived operation and extremely well executed. So obviously your question is right, it requires a lot of detailed planning. Firstly, let's be very clear, where was al-Zawahiri during this time or during when the ISAF was there for 20 years in Afghanistan? Obviously, he was hiding in Pakistan. There is no denial to that fact. Now, once the US forces left last year and Taliban took over in August, 15th August 20, that is last year, it gave an impetus to ISI, and that is how the chief was also there, ISI chief, and meeting all these so-called top leaders of Taliban. And apparently he was shifted, that is al-Zawahiri was shifted to Kabul, and therefore they felt now since US embassy, all embassies are out, there are no boots on ground, so it gave them total opportunity to shift him, and therefore he was under the patronage of Taliban and staying quite close to the green zone in a very, very safe house. Now, obviously, he was target number one of the United States since the last 20 years, and they had carried out some attacks, but this guy has been always elusive. He was evaded. I think his typical, I would say, he had quite good commando training that he would evade, and his basic military tactics and strategy was quite good. Now, once he came to Afghanistan, I think he lowered down his guard to some extent, because he was very, very safe. And obviously, some people say that was Sirajuddin Haqqani's house. Now, or whether it was, some of the people who had escaped from Afghanistan, whether it was one of those houses, because a lot of houses are lying vacant. So he would have been kept very safe there.
Right.
Now, obviously, this intelligence or boots on ground were not there. So a number of intelligence networks, one is, of course, human assets, which the US has cultivated there since last so many years. Then you have the electronic intelligence, the normal aerial surveillance, and cyber intelligence. So all these put together, they were narrowing down to his location. And finally, with all these assets, the location would have been narrowed down. Thereafter, they had to observe a particular pattern, because striking him and preventing collateral damage was one of the terms of reference. And therefore, some kind of a pattern he dictated. I told you, he became little casual. His guards were down. So he was coming maybe at a specified time on the balcony to just feel fresh in the early morning. And perhaps that is the time this accurate Hellfire missile has been struck. And obviously this was a Ninja missile which was modified to Hellfire so that the collateral damage is prevented. So this all shows that Pakistan, Taliban, they were all hands in gloves and sheltering this person. And I think it's a great achievement for the world, and especially for the US and India.
All right, let me take that point to Maroof Raza. Maroof, the fact that he was hiding in the heart of Kabul, what does this tell us about Taliban? Reports now saying that it was a safe house of Haqqani's aide. Now, US has long said that Taliban and Al-Qaeda have links. Taliban has denied that, but Zawahiri couldn't be hiding there without Taliban not knowing.
See, there are several pieces of information that are coming in, so we will know the real picture a few days later. The reality is that he was killed by a Hellfire missile without an explosive warhead, and this can be a lethal weapon to eliminate individuals without collateral damage. He was killed in the balcony of a house he was staying in Kabul. Clearly, he was in
Yes.
Afghanistan, but I don't think he was in Afghanistan for too long in the recent past. He was probably between Afghanistan and Pakistan, as has been the case with many Al Qaeda leaders. And he had moved into Afghanistan, assuming it is now a safe sanctuary for people like him who had been hounded by the US for more than 2 decades. He's clearly was a top man in the US hit list because he is known to have been one of the serious architects of the 9/11 attacks and also on certain bombings on US utilities and facilities in Africa, such as Nairobi. And the fact that the man was ailing, he was a doctor by profession, as we all know, but he was ailing because of the conditions in
Yes.
which they lived, hiding. But there are three or four things that emerge. One is the linkages between the Taliban and Al Qaeda are still intact. The linkages between the Haqqani group, which is also hounded by the US or at least wanted by the US, and I would see the US to extend its war on terror to leaders like Haqqani, who's the home minister of the current Taliban regime in Afghanistan, and who had been harboring people like al-Zawahiri and other Al-Qaeda leaders. It is the America which is exactly a year after they chose to withdraw from Afghanistan in humiliation, and they had a botched up drone attack
Yes.
in which civilians were killed. So this is kind of redemption for America and the Biden regime. President Biden was vice president under Obama when they made an attack into Pakistan to take out Osama bin Laden. So he knows the spillover effects of a killing like this would do for his reputation and the morale of the American intelligence services back in America, where money that is spent
Yes.
on such operations equals America's defense budget, if not more. And finally, and most important, is the fact that the Al Qaeda has been relevant but not a complete global threat for long. And the US will keep eliminating their leaders systematically. But the Al Qaeda is now a hydra headed monster. It is available in different shapes and contours, whether in Africa or in the Middle East, called Al Qaeda in the Middle East or in South Asia, in Afghanistan and Southeast Asia. So there are various variants. Al Qaeda is essentially an ideology and a philosophy which brings in a lot of anti American elements. But having said that, I don't think their ability to do sufficient damage in India can be taken. I would not take it to be dramatically high. But yes, the Al Qaeda is in close cohorts with the Pakistani intelligence agencies, which work closely with Al Qaeda, Taliban, and
Yes.
everybody else. And therefore, the spillover effect via Pakistan could be high for India, but not directly from Afghanistan.
Not directly. So lots of points there, Maroof. We'll explore those points in a little detail. But Achal Malhotra, let me come to you. You know, there are talks going on in Uzbekistan in which US is a partner in those talks, is an important important player there in those talks on the Afghanistan economic situation. You know, US has frozen Afghanistan's forex reserves. Where does this attack and the fact that Taliban was harboring terrorists, was harboring al-Zawahiri, where does that leave those talks?
No, at the end of the day, I don't think it is going to have any major impact on the processes which have been put into, action as far as dealing with Afghanistan or Taliban is concerned. This would go down the history as one of the important episodes, showing American determination to eliminate one of its declared enemies, and to show the public back home that Americans, the American president has taken the commitment to its logical conclusion, And by the way, this is an end of a terrorist, and the war against terrorism is likely to continue because he's going to be replaced by somebody else. But as far as the problem, as far as Taliban remains in power, there is absolutely no change in the ground realities which came into being last year in August with the Taliban taken over the power. The point is, the international community also cannot ignore it for a very long period of time. The plight of the common man in Afghanistan, and they can't turn their head from finding ways and means to help out the common Afghan people. This is what India has also been doing, and we have persisted with our assistance, which is targeted to benefit the common man on the street. And in fact, I think we are operationalizing our embassy also in Kabul, even if it is with a limited purpose. So this is one aspect. This is not a revolution that Taliban was hiding. We all know Taliban is hand in gloves with all these terror organizations, and will be tolerated only till. I mean, the bottom line is that they should not allow them to operate against any third country. It's a given fact that all these, terror outfits now think they are safe in Afghanistan, and it suits Taliban also. But the red lines are that they should not operate against American interest or the interest of anybody else in the country, in the neighborhood or elsewhere in the world. So that's more important.
All right.
So
Yes.
Over to you.
Yes, sorry to interrupt you there. I'm running short on time. General Meston, let's talk about the Pakistan role in this. You briefly mentioned that. Now, there are some who are saying that Pakistan may have helped US in eliminating Zawahiri. You know, Pakistan military chief is reportedly seeking US help on release of IMF loan. And then Pakistan media reported that ISI chief was in Washington a couple of months back. Where do you weigh in on the Pakistan role?
Pakistan's role in supporting terrorism, they are the root of terrorism, and that is the hub of terrorism. So Pakistan is actually the epicenter, and therefore let us not forget that. Now, coming on to the US role vis-a-vis Pakistan, I somehow feel it is quite unlikely, that is a trade-off that al-Zawahiri would have been killed and, some intelligence would have been given and therefore linked to the IMF loan. My personal view is that Americans have been there for 20 years. They have generated or created so many assets, intelligence assets, and therefore they would have used them effectively for this all surveillance, and especially human intelligence is of vital role. See, America may have had other kinds of intelligence, electronic and cyber and surveillance, aerial surveillance, but human intelligence is absolutely essential, and therefore they have large number of people who would be giving this information. Another thing we should remember, the resistance movement, which surprisingly I'm quite amazed as to why the world did not fund them, because that time resistance movement fighting in the Panjshir Valley, etc. They held out for quite a large number of days. Right now also the resistance movement is activated, and I'm aware that there are groups which are ready to strike back. So I foresee, firstly, Pakistan will always remain involved, and I really doubt this linkage between US and on this intelligence aspect. But I also foresee one thing. See, as Ambassador Achal brought out, today the focus of the world is on the people and also how to sort out this illegitimate Taliban regime. I feel the people of Afghanistan, and maybe a lot of assets there perhaps some kind of a resistance movement may be generated, because this will give an impetus, this killing of al-Zawahiri will give an impetus to the resistance movement. And perhaps, see, we must remember earlier, the Taliban was the hunters. Now they become the hunted, because they are on ground. Their location every day is being seen by people. So let us not be surprised, some kind of suicide attacks against the Taliban leaders and all may take place in the near future. And therefore, if this happens, it will be very good for India, because all these groups operating there like LAT, Jaish-e-Mohammed, etc. is not in our interest. So therefore, I think India also, along with America and some interested countries, can do some kind of planning covert operation to remove this illegitimate gradually. It
All
cannot
right.
be done overnight.
All right. Maroof Raza, one final word to you quickly. You know, if Afghanistan is harboring terrorists, then how does it change the India-Afghanistan equation? Should India engage with the Taliban? And if so, to what extent?
There is a lobby of limited number of people in Delhi who argue that we should continue to engage with the Taliban, just like America engaged with them at the peak of the Taliban's activities even before they took power in Kabul. I don't agree with that. I believe the Taliban needs to remain isolated. But the problem is the Taliban is in such firm control over Afghanistan that if you want to do any serious humanitarian intervention in Afghanistan, which is suffering from food and medical shortages, you have to go via the Taliban regime. And that is a choice that not just India, but a variety of countries are now contemplating on making after the conference, as you brought out, that recently took place in Uzbekistan. Some 20-odd countries and another 20-25 international organizations have been deliberating on that, from the US to European countries to even countries like the Middle Eastern countries like UAE, etc., which have missions in Afghanistan. So there is a problem there. The second problem is that the Taliban per se is an extension of the Pakistan military's agenda in Afghanistan. So if you legitimize them, you legitimize Pakistan's de facto military control over Afghanistan. And therefore, we have to be extremely cautious about how much we're going to go forward, because we have made some very serious investments for the people of Afghanistan, which have gone in extent of $2 billion upwards, from parliament building to dams, schools, hospitals, everything. But eventually, I believe there has to be an international initiative that has to be put into place for the people of Afghanistan. India trying to be a solo artist out there is not going to achieve much, because any extended Indian footprint is seen as a security threat by Pakistan, which is obsessed of keeping India out of Afghanistan. So goodwill of the Afghan people notwithstanding, I don't think we can do very much more. And at what cost? We've got a troubled neighborhood right now. Sri Lanka is in the dumps economically. Maldives is just getting out of China's shadow. Myanmar is in a bit of a democratic lapse, if I would say. Nepal is wanting Indian intervention. So India's resources are limited. We can only do that much and not anymore.
All right. Thanks very much, Maroof Raza, General Meston, and Achal Malhotra for joining us on this discussion, sharing your perspective. Pakistan remains the hub of terror. There's no denying that. Its role in this will be clear in the days to come, and Pakistan's de facto military control on Afghanistan, as Maroof was referring. So India should be treading cautiously here. Thanks very much, indeed, gentlemen, for speaking to us. We are stopping for a short break. Lots more on the other side. Stay with us.